The industry of fashion has long been the most influential in setting trends and standards of feminine beauty. Yet fashion houses are notorious for employing models who have a very specific physique when compared to the natural variations of a woman's body. And fashion magazines such as Vogue fill their pages with idealistic images for women to consume and compare themselves to. I'm going to focus on the fashion models themselves and the ways in which the foregrounding of thin body ideals in the fashion industry informs contemporary women's views of femininity. I aim to investigate where this discourse may come from and why the fashion industry so vividly perpetuates it. In doing so, I encourage people to think about how the presentation of underweight models in modern day media may affect not only the models, but fashion's female consumers. In the late 1940s and early 50s, tall and slender fashion models such as Davima and Jean Patchett were considered the industry's elite for haute couture. However, it was the sought-after curvy and voluptuous body shapes of starlets Marilyn Monroe and Brigitte Bardot that were the ideal for the average contemporary woman. This had changed by the 60s and 70s, when models such as British icon Twiggy began to rise to the top of the fashion scene, with a willowy frame, long thin legs, and what some consider as an almost adolescent physique.
That was, I think, in the 60s was to do with the birth of, the young people suddenly had power and money, and therefore the young body shape became fashionable.
By the late 80s, the world saw the rise of the supermodel, where dominant fashion models such as Cindy Crawford and Claudia Schiffer began to evolve into influential sex symbols. Each represented a strong and healthy feminine body type, the type of physique that the ordinary, everyday woman of the decade might aspire to have. Yet by the late 90s and early 2000s, the heroin chic and size zero look began to surface in the industry.
Images projected in fashion photos in the last few years have made heroin addiction seem glamorous and sexy and cool.
This was an era of grunge that romanticised drug use, with London's own Kate Moss thriving as the poster girl and setting the standards for what is known as the waif-like model, with underweight frames and prominent bone structures. In 1996, Charlene Hess-Biber named this epidemic the cult of thinness. Fashion models today have a particularly elite celebrity status, with the likes of Kendall Jenner and Bella Hadid commandeering the limelight. These models have incredible power in influencing the modern-day woman's ideas of what it is to be a shining example of femininity. Even though the models in today's society have developed a more toned and sculpted physique, it is still clear that there is a lack of diversity in the fashion industry, and the average model seen on catwalks and in magazines still exhibits the thin body ideal.
I think there is a movement back to being more of a sort of a shape rather than straight up and down. Yeah, I think there is a striving to be thin now.
One of the world's biggest modelling agencies, Elite London, has hundreds of models under its management. The average height of an Elite London model is 180 centimetres, with an average waist circumference of 61 centimetres. According to a standard waist-to-height chart determined by medical sources, those measurements have a lower than average ratio of 0.34.
So yeah, fashion models, I would say, are an exceptional shape. They don't represent the average woman.
It is standard practice for modelling agencies to publish their models' measurements so that potential clients can determine whether or not certain models will fit their clothing.
It goes by measurement more than weight because it's a fit issue, so you have to be able to fit the clothes.
So the question is not why models' measurements are published, but why the average model, as proven by scientific sources, is unhealthily underweight. Does this represent irresponsible motivation to not only inspiring models, but women in general?
Everything is visually impacting, and if all those images are of women with a certain body shape, then if you haven't got that, you will feel different.
There is no doubt that unhealthy and harmful eating patterns are often exploited and glamorised in popular culture.
Well, I'm on this new diet. It's very effective. Well, I don't eat anything. And when I feel like I'm about to faint, I eat a cube of cheese. Well, it's definitely working.
Research for the Women's Studies International Forum in 2006 discussed that disordered eating and obsession with food is a widely accepted way to deal with weight and body image issues, and it is largely considered normative behaviour for women. Many sources claim that anorexia has the highest mortality rate among psychiatric disorders, and it just so happens that the sufferers of anorexia nervosa, along with bulimia nervosa, are primarily adolescent females. It is impossible to pinpoint the exact causes of eating disorders, but it is suggested by HuffPost blogger and Cleveland Clinic psychologist Susan Albers that the fashion industry is a contributing factor in triggering and maintaining them. On the 1st of October 2017, a new law came into effect in France, banning the use of unhealthy models. The law stated that models will therefore be required to provide a doctor's certificate assisting to their overall physical health, with special regard to their body mass index. France's own Minister of Social Affairs and Health, Marisol Touraine, stated herself that exposing young people to normative and unrealistic images of bodies leads to a sense of self-deprecation and poor self-esteem that can impact health-related behaviour. Another way women deal with weight and body image issues is to have bariatric surgery, such as a gastric sleeve, band or bypass. According to a study in 2018, there are approximately 200,000 procedures performed annually in the US alone. I asked weight loss surgeon Dr. Nick Carter to describe the types of patient he most commonly operates on, and what he knows of their reasonings behind undergoing the surgery.
Generally, more are women than men. Certainly, you get a group of women in their sort of 50s and 60s who have collected a few medical problems and are struggling with their weight. I'm pretty sure most younger patients are more driven by media and looks and cosmesis.
There is a conflation between the standards of beauty and the standards of health, with a contradiction between the two.
There is a big crossover between what is understood as being healthy and what is understood for being for the purposes of beauty. In my research, I found that very often promotion around thinness was essentially cloaked in discourses of health.
In 2015, author Amanda M. Zeniowski discussed similar views to Gemma's, in that the terms fat and plus size and overweight and obese are often used interchangeably.
There is always a question around weight and health, and we always think of that in terms of women who are bigger. What we don't always think about is, what about those women who are really thin and their health, and how does that impact on beauty? I'm just wondering if that's the kind of thing that perpetuates eating disorders.
Young people are very impressionable, and young people see this everywhere on billboards, adverts, television, everywhere. Alongside with that, you have the other angle of the media and the press stigmatising people who struggle with their weight. It's a two-pronged thing.
I don't think the reason for fashion thinness is health, put it like that. I think it's all about an aesthetic.
In 2009, Ralph Lauren model Philippa Hamilton was fired by the high-end fashion label for being too overweight, even though she was a UK woman size 8.
They fired you, you say, because you were too large.
Because I was too large, yeah.
Well,
and it's very sad.
Why must high-end fashion brands like Ralph Lauren incorrectly label their already underweight models as overweight? It is simply not possible for the fashion industry to encourage healthy behaviour for its consumers when an overwhelming majority of fashion models are so unhealthy. In fact, several models have talked about their own personal experiences with eating disorders and how the fashion industry has helped to contribute.
I ordered these tablets that would like swell up in your stomach to keep hunger at bay, the 500 calorie diet, the 1,000 calorie diet, the apple a day diet.
I was asked by my agency to lose muscle mass by not eating and not exercising. I followed the advice and soon developed anorexia, followed by bulimia.
I actually think the fashion industry holds a lot of responsibility in terms of body image and the way that girls view their bodies.
The late German fashion designer Karl Lagerfeld once said that it was psychological problems that caused models to be underweight, not pressure from the fashion industry.
The story with the anorexic girls, nobody works with anorexic. That has nothing to do with fashion. People who have that, they have problems with family and things like that.
It's such a cop-out, and it's incredibly neoliberal. In some ways, it's a form of gaslighting by saying, we're not doing this. This is down to you.
Years ago, I worked in Selfridges, and I used to help with the fashion shows they used to run, and also with all the model shows we've done through the university. And the models do starve themselves, before a show. They'll live on fags and vodka. And when people pick models, they're very, very critical of their body shape, which must cause you psychological problems as far as I can see.
Leading fashion theorist Natalie Kahn wrote in 2000 that fashion can reflect, but it cannot renew society. And there are certainly ways that the fashion industry acknowledges and imitates the latest styles and trends from around the world, such as trend forecasting agency WGSN.
They go out and they do sort of street reviews. They go out and see what people are wearing around the world, and they put it into their predictions, which fashion companies then subscribe to in order to find out what's going on around the world. So that is the street feeding back into fashion. But I'm not sure whether the oppression for thinness is the same. I think it probably comes from the media and magazines like Vogue, that have been for years airbrushing their pictures. Street fashion, whatever, have an influence, but it is then taken by fashion and moulded into the shape they want, the body shape they want.
So could it be that the cult of thinness emerged from the desires of society rather than the fashion industry itself?
Certainly, the fashion industry plays a part in perpetuating that, but I wouldn't say that fashion is the primary reason. In many ways, this is a fallout of gender inequality, which is kind of predates all of this by millennia even.
I don't think you can ever pinpoint where does this start and who is absolutely in control of it, because I think it comes from everywhere.
Not all women conform to the industry's ideals of beauty. Plus-size models and body-positive activists such as Ashley Graham and Barbie Fiera are all working hard to challenge society's dominant beauty standards.
We need to work together to redefine the global vision of beauty.
I realized that it is possible to do whatever the fuck I want at my weight without having to change myself to fit something.
Fashion wasn't recognised that there are these people who are a huge market with a lot of money that don't want to buy the thinness look.
In the words of Jess Baker for Elle magazine, the body positivity movement has infiltrated the world's social media feeds, news reports and pop culture consciousness, and with it a fascinating trend has bubbled up. In 2019, Victoria's Secret's Chief Financial Officer, Stuart Bergendorfer, announced the cancellation of the lingerie company's highly publicised annual fashion show, with much speculation that it was due to the criticism that its one-dimensional view of beauty is outdated and irrelevant. Victoria's Secret may not have been helped by the rise of Rihanna's underwear brand, Savage X Fenty, which in the same year presented an inclusive catwalk show that featured women of all shapes and all sizes. Even so, Gemma believes that standards of the body will always exist.
There is still this element of what is the right kind of plus size body. So what are curves that are acceptable and what are curves that are not acceptable. I think that perhaps it's not just thinness that we're talking about anymore. It's more this kind of a sort of a cult of the body, really.
Cosmopolitan magazine was under much scrutiny with its October 2018 issue, using plus-size model Tess Holliday as its cover star. According to online sources, Holliday is morbidly obese. She has also publicly discussed her experiences with emotional overeating.
I was going through how I arrived to start emotionally eating,
which in fact contradicts the laws of banning the use of unhealthy models with apparent eating disorders.
This is not promoting obesity, but this is promoting anorexia. And I would love for someone from the body positive community to explain the difference.
Speaking of contradictions, in April 2019, the #1 leading fashion magazine, Vogue, published a video onto their YouTube channel featuring runway stars as they talked about eating disorders, size discrimination, and the fashion industry's extreme relationships with weight.
What I was receiving for many years was that my body was not right. And it's almost impossible to erase that.
It's received major backlash, with YouTube comments such as, "Seems unfair that Vogue can be the leaders in the systematic abuse of young women and also capitalise on the body positivity movement. You only get to pick one." You could argue that it is hypocritical and divergent for Vogue to have produced a video with such a sympathetic narrative towards the unfair treatment of models in the fashion industry, when it is in fact Vogue themselves that are one of the main leaders in fueling the unfair treatment, with its consistent use of unhealthily thin models. As fashion editor and critic Robin Given said in 2018, when fashion turns its attention to previously ignored markets, it has a tendency to exaggerate whatever characteristic is now being embraced, to overcompensate for past transgressions. In other words, the fashion industry has used the movement of body positivity to its advantage, turning it into a commodity and a weapon, using dissent to market its products.
It's like almost as though there can't be an in-between where women just look like women. It needs to be one extreme or the other.
Not only does a fashion company do this to make money directly, but also to improve the image of its brand. According to McKinsey & Company's The State of Fashion 2020, consumers and employees are putting increasing pressure on fashion companies to become proactive advocates of diversity and inclusion. More companies will elevate diversity and inclusion as a higher priority, embed it across the organisation, and hire dedicated leadership roles. But their initiatives will also come under increasing scrutiny in terms of sincerity and results. The fashion industry is a multi-billion-dollar business that has the ability to capitalise from not only thin ideals, but any ideal it can perpetuate.
The reason these discourses are so concentrated is because you make money out of people's fear. You tell people how you should look. You then sell them all of these things that can help them to get to that point of how you should look. Except you never get to that point of how you should look, because it always changes.
I asked Gemma and Louise who they thought benefits from the thin beauty standards and who they believe is most prominently at the receiving end.
This is very much a product of late capitalist ideas around, selling a product, around having control over people. Anyone with any kind of power is able to benefit from this. Condé Nast, for example, who published Vogue.
Industry, therapists, private surgeons, all of those people absolutely benefit from it because we're paying them money to make us feel like we fit in into something that actually doesn't really exist.
I would say it's aimed at everybody. It is, of course, traditionally and historically it's women.
I think it's aimed at white women. I think it's aimed at young white women. I think it's aimed at young white women who have money. Why? Because white femininity is the most prized possession. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying that's how it's seen. And being young has got more economic and cultural value than just about anything else. If this is really an issue, why isn't this about all women and all men? Because our place in society is only valued through how we look. That's why it's so pervasive, because it can be. We allow it to be.
It is far too simplistic to conclude that the cult of thinness affects all women all over the world, when this conclusion relates to an issue that is far too complex to ever put to rest. That being said, it is clear that the women who are more susceptible to the thin ideals presented by the fashion industry are entirely dependent on factors such as age, race, wealth and geographical location.
It's a very Eurocentric ideal in lots of ways. So I think if we were to kind of move out of that, we would have very kind of different understandings of what an ideal body is. If we're talking about it on a global scale, it's not just about bodies, it's about whiteness, it's about class, race, all of these things come into play once we start looking at this in different contexts.
It just seems to me that this is literally an incredibly westernized discourse that is embedded within a capitalist society that's about making money. Because how can you think about women in India who are worrying about whether they're too fat when they can't feed themselves and their families? It's actually quite a privileged position to be in like a Western world. If we're privileged to worry about it, then we know that this has got to do with money.
The controversy surrounding the fashion industry's persistent presentation of thin and unhealthy models is warranted. The continuing imagery of unattainable beauty standards has the ability to perpetuate psychological issues for both models and consumers alike. Slowly but surely, the diversity of female models may be expanding in the world of fashion due to the plus-size movement. However, with the fashion industry's reputation for exaggerating current trends, the opportunity for women who exhibit anything in between these extreme body standards is lost.
I'm not saying that a young, thin, white model isn't beautiful, but what we are saying is that there's a much broader spectrum.
It is opinion over fact regarding what causes these ideals, but an opinion formed solely from my research would suggest that it is the media and society, with the aid of fashion's ever-growing perpetuations. Let us hope that the future of fashion is more flexible, with opportunities for a happier and healthier range of women walking the runway, from thin to plus size, and just as importantly, everything in between.